Hi everyone, my name is Theo Lynn. I'm the Associate Dean for Strategic Projects at DCU Business School, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker today, Gerry Duffy. We've been working with Gerry and known Gerry for a couple of years now. He's, I think, a very inspirational guy. He's a qualified fitness instructor and he's worked in a whole variety of different sectors. But I suppose the reason that we would like Gerry to speak to you today is I found that Gerry is inspirational both in his approach and his perspective on how we can develop our own mental mindsets to overcome challenges, and in particular to help us plan and achieve our own personal goals against whatever adversity that we have. Um, you know, I don't know whether he'll be presenting this today, but when he presented to us first, he told us this story from someone who wasn't particularly fit. I think he was a smoker, slightly overweight in his late 20s, I suppose, and how he set himself goals and set to achieve what would have been probably unachievable for him at that time, and ultimately led to running 32 marathons in 32 days and doing 10 Ironmans in 10 days and various other things. And I think that particularly given the context of this second lockdown and COVID-19 and pandemics, sometimes we need that extra mental strength to overcome these challenges. So today, Gerry's going to give us an hour of his time to talk about his story and also give us a couple of tips on how we might prepare ourselves for another semester, particularly in this difficult time around coronavirus. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Gerry. Thanks.
I think this is the third, if not the fourth time that Theo and I and DCU have worked together. And I think the reason I'm back again is Theo keeps saying to himself, one of these days he's actually going to be good. I think that's the reason he's given me another chance, maybe with you today. So you might be wondering what this is all about. We've got, I'd like to think, an interesting hour ahead. Now, it's my responsibility to make it interesting. I'd encourage you to listen very consciously. I'd encourage you to, I wouldn't have known this when I was in my 20s. I only learned this in my 30s and in my 40s. But I would encourage you, if you find anything interesting, anything insightful, anything valuable that might support you, whether it's as a student, as a mature student, in any area of life. Because I think I could be giving this talk to any audience. I firmly believe that. But let me give you a little snapshot of the forecast between now and midday. So I'm going to talk about some of the habits of high achievers. I'm going to talk about getting your mind set. And we've got a very specific exercise we're going to do there. I'm going to briefly talk about the 4 keys to success and share with you an academic example of where this has worked in the past. And also, we achieve our goals. I would imagine everybody here has goals, and we all have a common goal in terms of study, I would imagine. But goals are achieved over a thing called time. And everybody has the time. People say, I don't have the time, I got so much to do. We all get access to the same resource. We all get access to the exact same 168 hours every single week. But we use that time to different levels of effectiveness. So I'm going to share some simple, but I believe really powerful ideas in that arena for you. So that's the agenda that we have in store. So Theo was very kind. Let me just give you like 3 minutes of why maybe I have some value in this area. So Theo was kind enough to share some of the things that I've been lucky enough to do. So that's an event that myself and a friend of mine did 11 years ago, a long time ago now, where we undertook to run a marathon every day, 26.2 miles, the equivalent distance of the Dublin City Marathon, every day for 32 consecutive days. He also mentioned an event that I did, the equivalent of 10 iron distance triathlons in 10 days, which I did 10 years ago this summer, an event that involves swimming and cycling and running for an average. For me, it was an average of 16 hours a day for 10 consecutive days. I also I'm a professional speaker. I am a qualified fitness instructor, but I also do lots of other things. And most of my work, 99% of my work, is in the corporate sector around performance. And I believe doing simple things to an outstanding level. So I do a lot of work at great organizations and environments like DCU, and I speak in beautiful venues like the Helix. The last time Theo and I worked together was in the Helix. Remember those days when we could go into a venue like that, and maybe the convention center. I also do quite a bit of work overseas, and I am very privileged to work in these kind of environments. So that's what I do. But here's the thing. I used to be really bad. Yes, I've achieved, I'd like to think, some really, really big goals. But if you told me at the age of 27, number one, I would become this person, and number two, I could achieve the things that I've been forced to achieve, I would have said, no, that clearly that's somebody else. At school, when I left school, not only did I not get many points, I wouldn't have got enough points to get into any course in any college. By the age of 27, I was 3.5 stone heavier than I am today. I was a very different person to who I am now. So this photograph was taken in July of 1995. Possibly some of you weren't even born in 1995. I'm the guy on the right-hand side of the photograph. I'm sure some people might recognize the gentleman on the left. If you don't, he was a very famous man. He was a big hero to me. He was a man from Spain. Sadly, he died 10 years ago at a very young age of 54. But in his time on the earth, I would imagine all of us have dreams and ambitions. I really want to achieve the very best I can in my dreams and my ambitions. He did it. He self-actualized. He became the greatest golfer in the world while he was on this earth. His name was Severiano Ballesteros. I recognized him when I got the photograph developed. I didn't recognize me, because I'd left school somewhat motivated. I was not academically, it was a big challenge for me at that time. I've since learned the habits of high achievers, and I've since been back to college on a few occasions and got results that this guy couldn't have imagined was possible. And I'm going to share some of the core principles of how it is possible. And a lot of it is to do with the mind. As a result of this photograph, it jolted me, this photograph. I'm 4.5 stone heavier in that photograph than I am today. That day I smoked 50 cigarettes. That's who I was at the age of 27. Clearly I'd become a different person, but it started with a decision. And that's the great thing. If there's something you want to improve, if there's something you want to change, what I've discovered, here's the great news. It's only ever one decision away. We could change anything. Geese will always fly south every winter. But human beings, we have the intelligence to be able to go in any direction of our choosing at any moment in our lives. It starts with a decision, but then that's not enough. We've got to then move on from the decision and take action. So I decided I was going to take up exercise, and I did it. I took up exercise a week after that photograph was taken. And for me, that exercise became running. Very first day I took up running. Very first day. And this wasn't lost to me, because I remember consciously making myself aware of this on day one. I feel better than I did yesterday. That's interesting. I've done this running thing. I feel better. I felt I had more energy. It began because I brought into my life, I decided to do it the next day. I became more motivated. I did it 3 times a week, 4 times a week. Pretty much immediately I got into that. Running maybe very short distances, but doing it on a regular week, 3 or 4 times a week basis. Got more energy, got more motivation, got more confidence. If we want to be anything, I've discovered we have to get it. If we want to be fitter, we have to get fitter. If we want to be healthier, we have to get healthier. If we want to become more knowledgeable in a subject, we have to go and get it. And that might seem, Gerry, is that the best you can give me? But when you think about it, it's a really important thing. And as soon as I start to get better at things start, I got fitter, I got healthier, I got more ambitious, but I had to go to it. Like 27 years of age, it wasn't coming to me. As soon as I changed, everything changed. I started to get focused. I stretched myself from 3 miles of running to 4 miles to 5 miles. And this was a principle. I brought this principle into other areas where I began to just challenge myself. I had a good job in sales. I was in a sales role, but I decided to go back to college part-time. And I did that for 2 years around that time. I worked, when I went to college, compared to when I'd been in school 10 years before, here's something I did different. And I got much better results as a result of it. I worked 10 times harder. Maybe it's because I was more mature. I worked 10 times harder. Now I had to, because if I didn't, I definitely wouldn't have passed. I definitely wouldn't have qualified in the course that I did. But I succeeded. That fed into new confidence. I brought it into other areas of my life. And I got more ambitious. I was up to kind of 2 hours of running. I said, I'd go and run a marathon. Theo and I and Molly and Pierangelo were talking about marathons before we came on the call today. And so many people doing marathons now. I said, I'll do a marathon because I wanted to achieve, I came up with this list of areas of focus in my life. Family, work, endurance, sports, contribution, and health. Here are the 5 things. Family, work, endurance, sports, contribution, and health. I said, I want to become the very best I can be in these things. You see, everything we do to standards. There's nothing, I believe, we don't do in life that we don't do to a standard. Eat food to a standard. Drive a car to a standard. Speak, dress to a standard. Brush your teeth to a standard. Study to a standard, listen to lectures to a standard, take notes to a standard, even sleep. I had a good night's sleep. We sleep to a standard. I identified these areas. I was getting so much happier in my life because of the effort I was putting in. And I decided I want to become the very highest standard. Here's the standards: poor, average, good, excellent, outstanding, or the very best of my ability. The very best of my ability. So I said, right, okay, what does that look like in endurance sports? You want to become the very best of your ability. That's when I got this ambition to run a marathon. I didn't realize just what an impact it would have, but I went and I did a marathon and I realized I could do that. So then I said, well, maybe there's more in you. Maybe you can go to another level. I ended up doing an Ironman triathlon where you swim, cycle, and run all in the same day for a really, really, really long time. That's a photograph of my first ever Ironman triathlon. I'm actually in that photograph, just in the orange hat, right bang in the center. Out of that, I got an idea, which was to run 32 marathons in 32 consecutive days, which Theo mentioned. Now, let me tell you about this. I'm a professional speaker. I speak a lot. I used to be so afraid of public speaking. I walked into that room. That room is the Greville Arms Hotel in my hometown in Mullingar, which is about 5 miles from where I'm standing right now. I walked into that room at the age of 37, September 2005. And I was pathologically fearful. My first ever formal presentation. I was pathologically fearful of public speaking walking into that room. But here's what I've discovered. Your success index in life is equal to your effort index in life. Your success index in life. I put monumental effort into, number one, putting myself into the room mentally because I didn't want to do it. I was terrified. But also I put a massive amount of practice. And we might wonder, why would we do that? Here's what I've discovered. I was not doing then what I do now. I did a completely different business. I'm so glad I took it on. What I've discovered is this: our success in anything is determined by how uncomfortable our success in life. I was so afraid of public speaking 2 days before I went into that room. I'd been to a hypnotist to give me the courage to speak to 4 people. Ironically, now it's my job. It's my passion is public speaking. But what I've discovered is our success in life is determined by how uncomfortable you and I are prepared to get. Can I invite you to stand up for a moment? Now, we can't see anybody. I absolutely trust that you will do this. I'm going to invite you to stand up for a minute when you're ready, just from your desks, wherever you are. I just want to share a principle with you, but I'd rather you feel it than just me talk about it. So I'm going to invite you when you're ready to raise your hands as high as you can. As high as you can. as high as you possibly can. Okay, take a seat. Take a seat. I just thought you might like a stretch. No, I didn't. I did that for a very particular reason. Now, I asked you, I was looking for, remember we spoke about standards and the poor, average, good, excellent, outstanding, the very best of your ability. That's what I was looking for you to show me, because I use words very particularly. I said, as high as you can, the very best of your ability. Now, if we were doing this live, if I could see, if we had a chat going here, I would ask you, is that the very limit of your ability? And you might even say yes. And then I'd say this, I'd say, well, what if I gave you 500 euros? We did it again, and all you had to do was go 1 inch more. And then I'd ask you, do you believe you could achieve it? And possibly 100% of the audience would say yes. 100 euros, yeah. And I would say, what strategy would you employ? And you'd say, well, I just go my tippy toes. I'd say, there you go, 500 euros. And I say, is that your limit? And you'd say, yes. And I'd say, okay, well, if we did it again, a third time, and on top of the inch, you had to do another inch, but there's 10,000 euros if you can do it. I ask an audience, do you think you could do that? 98% of people will say yes. I say, what's your strategy? They'll say, I'll stand on a chair. And yet, when we do it the first time, everybody does this. Nobody does this. And nobody gets on a chair. But if we want to achieve our true potential, the way we get there is we've got to stretch. And even when we hit a wall, I hit a monumental wall, which I'm going to share with you when we come to this section. And it was around study. And it only happened 5 years ago. I'm going to share that story shortly. But what I did was, you see, what you would have done for the 10,000 euros, getting on the chair is thinking outside the box. Sometimes we think, look, I'm at my limit, I'm at my limit, I'm at my limit. But not if you're willing to stop and think outside the box. And if we're prepared to do that, we'll amaze ourselves at what we're capable of achieving. Let me share with you some goal-setting tips, habits of high achievers. I'd encourage you to do this. In fact, I'm going to encourage you to grab a pen and a paper, and we're going to do a few exercises. I'd love you to do that with me now. So if you're ready to begin, we're going to begin. So number one, my number one goal setting tip with you is to, and I'm going to encourage you to have college. We could speak about any area, but I want you, just for the purposes of today, because we're under the umbrella of DCU, I'm going to invite you and encourage you to have your college. Just think about college. Okay, so my number one tip for you, there's so many goal setting tips I've discovered. I've hundreds of them. I'm just going to share 2 or 3 of them with you today. Okay, but here's number one. You ready? Create a vision. Create a vision of success. Create a vision of success. What I'd love you to do is this. I'd love you to draw success now on a sheet of paper. Draw college success. I'd encourage you to do that now, please. I want you to draw it. I'm going to give you a minute to do that. So I'll share with you what mine was when I went back to college 7 years ago, because I did go back to college 7 years ago. I'm going to share with you what my vision looked like when I created at that time. But I'm going to go really quiet now. I want you to draw. If you were to draw success in college, what do you see? I'm going to give you a minute to draw that now. Okay. So when I went back to college in 2013 for 3 years, and I created this vision. I drew what I saw, very much into visualizing goals. And I learned the power of this. If it can work for running 32 marathons in 32 days, I believe it can work for almost anything. Because people told me every day for 2 years that that's impossible. But we were fortunate enough to achieve it. And so I've been using it. I'd been using it before that, but I use this with all of my big goals. I now visualize success. It's amazing. Now we got to do more than just visualize, but it's very, very powerful. And I visualize, this is me 3 years in advance. I created this vision. This is me receiving the qualification. This is the person giving me the qualification. This is a stage we are standing on. And this is the audience in which my family would be there. Now, here's something I would encourage you to do. If I buy an airplane, when we talk about goal setting, if I buy an airplane and I hire a pilot, because I can't fly an airplane, and I say to the pilot, take me to America, the pilot is not going to take off. She's going to turn around to me and she's going to say, well, Gerry, hang on now. This is a really big place. One of the challenges, let me share with you 23 years of not achieving a goal because of this principle. From the age of 8 until I was 31 years of age, I had a dream, I had a vision, I had a goal. And the goal was to be a great golfer. Be a great golfer. But the challenge with that, it's a very commendable goal. But the challenge with that, it's like saying to a pilot, take me to America. The pilot needs more information. You want to be a great golfer. What does that mean? Even if you say to the pilot, take me to the East Coast of America, the pilot will refuse to take off because it's such a big place. They won't even take off if you say New York. They still will not take off if you say a JFK because there's 5 different terminals. It's a really big place. I want to be a great golfer. I want to do well in college. What does that mean? So what I would encourage you to do is to put some, for example, this is an example because I don't know what you drew. It's different things for different people. But maybe to bring this to life, if you were to put this under a microscope, what detail would you see in it? What date would be on this? So the second of the second, 20 what? For example, who's in the audience? Now, I'm just using that as an example. Success is different things to different people, but it's the importance of being really specific, because let me save you 23 years of being vague and ambiguous with my goals. At the end of 1998 into early 1999, I got really specific. I wrote down specific things that would define a great golfer. I said, if I can achieve these specific numbers, because golf is very much a numbers game, I said, that's success. 23 years dreaming about it. I got there in less than 6 months when I got really specific. The next stage of this goal setting exercise is, I want you to write this down. And there could be one answer, there could be 2 answers, there could be 3 answers. But here's the thing, with this vision that you've drawn, I want you to answer that question. Why do you want it? I'd love you to answer that question now. Write it down. Why do you want this? Let's assume this was your vision, whatever your vision is, whatever you've come up with. I'd like you underneath it to write down why. Why do you want this goal? I'm going to give you a few minutes to do, or a few moments to do that now. So I invite you just to capture for the next 30 seconds. Why do you want to achieve that goal? Okay, next section. We're just documenting what I believe to be really important information. Here's the next section. I want you to spend 30 seconds on this. What are the consequences of you not achieving the goal? What are the consequences of you not achieving your vision? I'd love you to spend 30 seconds on that, please. So we've just done the why. Now, what are the consequences of not achieving it? Just write down whatever comes to mind for you. Okay, next question for you. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 and 10, how challenging, what score of difficulty do you think, how hard will it be to achieve the goal, the success that you have? On a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult do you think it's going to be to achieve your college goal? Is it a 2? Is it an 8? Is it a 5? Is it a 7? Just give it a number. Any number you like. It's personal to you. What you want to achieve, how difficult is it going to be on a scale of 1 to 10? I'm assuming you've done that fairly quickly. So I would imagine we've got 2s and we've got 9s and maybe 10s, and we probably got lots of 6s and 7s and maybe even 8s. Here's the next section in this little short workshop that we're doing. I'd like you to write down a list of things. And I want you to go back in your mind that this could have happened a week ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when you were 14, when you were 9, it doesn't matter. But I'd like you now to write down a list of things. I call this exercise inner evidence, this particular exercise we're about to do, inner evidence. It's a really, if you want to get your mind set, if you want to build resilience, we start with putting value on ourselves. One of the challenges is we are conditioned, I believe, to deflect putting value on ourselves. And the brain gets confused because somebody pays us a compliment, we throw it back in their face. No, I'm not taking a compliment. The brain gets confused. Okay, maybe she's not worth it. Maybe I'm not worth it. I'm telling those people I'm not worthy of that compliment. So we weaken the brain. I don't know anybody that goes to a gym to make their muscles weaker. Why do we do this with the most important muscle of all, the brain? So I'd like to do the opposite. I want you to write down things you've already achieved in your life that fall under one of two headings. Took significant effort. Very proud of. Things you've already achieved in your life, whether it was a year ago or 10 years ago when you were 9, it doesn't matter. Any time in your life. Could have been yesterday. Things you've already achieved in your life that took significant effort and or you are very proud of. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to come up with at least 2, 3, 4 things. It could be maybe getting into DCU, could be a fantastic success, I would imagine, for many, many people here. So maybe getting the qualifications. Maybe it's going back as a mature student. Maybe that's something you're incredibly proud of. Maybe it's to do with a health challenge that you might have had. Maybe you helped somebody else. Maybe it's a job you've created or made happen. Maybe you started a business. Maybe it's getting through first year in college. It's different things for different people. Things you've already achieved in your life that took significant effort and that you're very proud of. I'm going to give you 60 seconds on that one now, please. Another 20 seconds. Try and come up with at least one more thing. Okay. Now what I'd like you to do is I want you to put a circle. I want you to pick one. Which one are you most proud of? Which one was the hardest? Just put a circle or an asterisk around it or beside it. I want you to pick one, the one that took the most to achieve. Okay. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult, and if you're happy to do it, and if it helps in this exercise, maybe reconnect with it. Remind yourself of that time. On a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult was that achievement? What did it take to achieve that on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 or 2, not really that much, Gerry. 4 or 5, yeah, a bit of work in it. 6, 7, 8, a lot of work, Gerry. 9, 10, Gerry, everything it took. It took everything. It was so much to get there. I'd just forgotten because it's 5 years ago. What number would you give it? Now, I want you to draw 2 boxes. Doesn't matter, it can be the same color, it doesn't matter. And the score that you just came up with like 10 seconds ago, I want you to put that score, that number in here into this box. Say, for example, it's 9. It's only because I've done this so often, this is usually what I get, okay? The one that the success that you've had, whether it was last week or when you were 15 or 22, whatever it is, what number, the inner evidence one, the one we just done like 20 seconds ago. So put that number in that box. And in this box, I want you to put the number. Do you remember I asked you about your college goal and how hard do you think that's going to be? Whatever number you come up with 4 or 5 minutes ago, I want you to put it in this box. Usually, what I usually find here is it's usually somewhere like that. Now, the numbers possibly are quite different for you, but here's a pattern I see 98% of the time. This number is 98% of the time, it's bigger than this number. 1% of the time, it's the same. The other 1% of the time, this might be an 8 and this might be a 7, but it's very rare, but it does happen. But let's go through the 3 scenarios. The first 2, if you're willing to accept this compliment, I so believe success is 80% psychological. Take it as somebody that speaks now so much, so often. I've addressed over 500,000 people in the last 10 years. The same guy that 15 years ago was so afraid of public speaking, he had to go to a hypnotist to speak to 4. What I now am certain of, in my opinion, is success is 80% psychological, and it starts with putting a value on ourselves. If you're willing to accept this compliment from me, you have evidence you can achieve the college goal based on this. If this number is higher than this number, it proves you have what it takes. If the number is the same, it proves you have what it takes. If this is an 8 and this is a 7, look how close you are. You're like within touching this. It's not this massive leap that you have. You've evidence of what you can achieve, because I believe people are people. Goals, yes, we have goals in different areas of our lives, but it's always the same person. Whether it's a fitness goal, whether it's a college goal, whether it's a relationship goal, it's you, the human being, that achieves it. You don't change. The goal might change. But the brain, it's always the same brain. And if you're willing to acknowledge things you've already achieved in your life, you can use those. I got through the downturn in my business, like 12, 13 years ago. I had a really difficult time in business. It was a 9 out of 10. However, confronting the fear of public speaking was a 10. This proves I have what it takes. If COVID is going to have an impact on my business, it might be a 7 or an 8. Maybe it will be. I don't know yet. But I know I can do 10s. So that's my start in psychology. And that's an exercise, one exercise in getting your mindset. Now, let me give you one other habit of high achievers. High achievers, I believe they do these things. They create vision. They're quite comfortable doing these things. Nothing will work unless we do. Doing some of these really simple exercises can have a big impact. Let me give you just one other habit of high achievers. There's hundreds of them I could have shared. Let me share one. Make time for physical exercise. And you might say to me, Gerry, come on, don't bring up that sport thing now. I'm not into sport. I never mentioned sport. Exercise is a different thing. Some people exercise through sport. The value of physical exercise, not just because it's good for us physically, I believe it has such an impact mentally. I would imagine there's lots of people here on this call today already doing this. I've never, ever not felt better. Me personally, I exercise very early in the mornings. I went out for a 35-minute run this morning. I was home by 7 o'clock, feeling so positive about the day ahead. I can absolutely prove to myself that the day I exercise, I perform better. I have more energy, more motivation, more focus, more resilience, more confidence. It's out there for everybody. Exercise is different things to different people. A friend of mine runs many businesses, big into exercise. This gentleman has achieved really big things in sport as well, but he runs a number of businesses, and his businesses, some of them have been massively impacted by COVID. Chatting to him just before Christmas, he told me the previous Sunday, he said, I haven't exercised in months. And he said, I was working last weekend, I came home Sunday evening, and the world of problems in my head. I had all these different things going on. I was stressed to the hilt. And he said, I decided for the first time in months, rather than going and sitting on the couch, I'd go out and I'd run for an hour. He said to me, Gerry, I came back a different person. "30 minutes of exercise, 2%. It's 2% of your day." I would imagine there's lots of people here who would agree with it. Now, I did not know this. It's only at the age of 27 that I got this. But thankfully, exercise is now like brushing my teeth. Exercise, if I want to show up at my best in my career, if I want to show up when I'm back to college at my best when I was studying, exercise, non-negotiable. Last March, COVID hit. Exercise, Gerry, now more than ever you've got to exercise because you're about to get hit with some mental tests here. And I knew this from 2008 when I got all those massive business challenges that so many businesses got. Even those times, and I went through some very challenging times in my business 12, 13 years ago. But because I was exercising early in the morning, it just had me ready to meet head on the walls that I was hitting every day in my business. And it kept me resilient. Now, let me share with you the 4 keys to success. 4 keys to success. As I mentioned to you, I went back to college, went there for 3 years. At the end of the 3 years, I would imagine it's something similar in DCU, but they gave us this really big project. And they said, you got this period of time to put in this project. I said, and by the way, it's pass or fail. All those exams you've done, assignments over the last 3 years, it's all centered on this now. And this one, it's not graded, it's just pass or fail. And by the way, you got to pass it. Okay, so I went and I immersed myself, put a lot of study into it. This was in early 2016. A huge amount of work into it. Obviously, I was massively challenged. I worked so hard in college, you wouldn't believe. I learned some really powerful strategies of how to get there. And one of them is what I call the 3v1. If somebody has to do an hour, I got to do 3 hours. They do 3 hours, I got to do 9. If they are handed an assignment and that person there needs 9 hours, I know myself, unless I do 27 hours, I'm not going to pass. I'm not going to get a grade. So I made that commitment at the very beginning of the 3 years. Gerry, you know this now because you're much older and much wiser than you were when you're in school. You've got to be prepared to do 3 times the hours that anybody else is doing if you want to get this qualification. And I brought that principle for the first 3 years. They give us this final assignment. I did it again. Put massive hours into it, submitted the final paper. I'm in my car one day, probably 6-8 weeks later, Friday morning, I'll never forget it. Phone rings. Hi, Gerry. This is person from the college. Listen, we're just writing out to you with your final results. You'll be getting it on Monday. I thought, God, that's really nice of him to ring me. And yeah, we just thought you might like the courtesy of a phone call. We just wanted you to know you failed. Sorry? You failed. Sorry? I'm really sorry. You didn't pass. I'm really sorry you failed. Sorry? At this stage, I realized there was tears streaming down my face. 5 years ago, I was 47 years of age getting this phone call. 3 years. Are you serious? Really sorry. Now, if you want, we'll give you one more opportunity, but you got to reset the whole thing. Do you want that opportunity? Here's the 4 keys to success. Now, I got to be honest with you. I really struggle with this. I cried for 2 days. 4 keys to success. The first is story. It's like if I'm playing a game of football and I'm picked as the cornerback and they put the marquee forward on me, and in the first minute of the game, the county final, he scores a goal. This isn't going to be my day. This guy is better than me. We're not going to win. That's a story that's going on in my head. Now, this is called the 4 keys to success. So there's got to be more to this, Gerry. Come on, give me more to this. There has to be more. Okay, this isn't going to be my day. He's better than me. Got to change the story. If I don't change the story, if you get hit with a wall, this COVID thing, it's so unfair on my studies. How am I expected to graduate now? I'm expected to add or do what I have to do now. Like, I don't have the same opportunities. That's a story. Now, if we want things to be better, if that's something you're not happy with, to be better, remember, we have to get better. So we got to change the story. Okay, he scored a goal on me in the first minute, but that's the last time he's going to score. Now you see I've changed the story. This COVID thing, I'm going to accept it for whatever it is in terms of the way I'm going to have to engage with DCU, engage with exams. Now I'm rewriting the story. And we can choose that. Now we can choose to live in the old story, or I realize now that I can choose to write a different story. It's like geese will always fly south. But human beings, we can choose to go in a different direction. And psychology is the starting point. Now, the very first thing we got to move to the next level is we got to harness our attitude. After I cried for 2 days, I said, right, okay, it's what I do about this. They've given me another opportunity. So I got to bring a stronger attitude. What a great thing. They'll give me another opportunity. Now, my attitude. Now, the next one is I got to take actions. Now, but let me define actions. If I did what I did for the first exam, or if I did what I did in the first minute of the game, I'm going to keep getting what I'm getting. So actions have to be defined. I got to take better actions than I did before. They got to be better, or they got to be new. I got to mark them tighter. That's an example of better. Or I'm going to mark them from this side because this side he seems to be turning me over. So that's an example of a new action. If I do, I'm likely to get better results. That's the 4 keys to success. Nothing worthwhile comes easy. When something happens that's not of our choosing, for example, you fall short in an exam, at the end of year 2, you thought you were going to get this and you got this. Maybe it's they threw an unexpected project at you that you weren't expecting. Maybe it's the fact that we have to do online learning instead of in the room learning. It starts with, well, what story am I going to tell myself about this? Then I got to bring a harnessed attitude to it. I've got to take new or better actions. And if I do, may lead to better results. In the few minutes we've left, I want to share with you something that you already know, but I want to give you some tips on it. Our goals, your study, your time in DCU, our goals are achieved over a resource. We achieve our goals over a resource called time. And you hear so many people say, look at all the stuff they're asking us to do. I don't have the time. Well, let me ask you a question. And I want you to be really, 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 really honest, because the only person you're answering this question to is you. It's not to Theo, it's not to me. This is for you. So just answer the question on paper. You don't even have to share it with Theo or anybody. Let's go back to this ladder. I use this ladder in so many areas. If a time management guru was following you since COVID began, in terms of, let's just look at you as a student, as a full-time student or as a mature student, whatever you might be. Okay, and let's talk about your time relative to study. So I'm specifically tying your time with your DCU ambitions. Okay, if a time management wizard, expert, was following you for that time and was grading you in terms of your effectiveness of the use of time, what score do you think the time management expert, if they watched you for the last 10 months, what score, be really honest, what score would they give you out of 10? Just write a number down. Now your number is your number. I don't know whether it's 2 or 10 or 9 or 4 or 3. I don't know. But if we want, so many people say, I'd love to be better with time. Well, it starts with scoring yourself and being really honest. How effective are you now? Let me give you some quick time tips. Here's number 1. Are you ready? Actually, I'll give you a really interesting line in a minute. So just pause there, because I'll tell you when I'm ready to give you the key line. But let me go back to boarding school. I went to boarding school. 5 years, 1980 to 1985, a long time ago. If you were in that study hall and followed me for 5 years, in that study hall, we were there for 3-4 hours. We were there from kind of 5 until 9 every night with a few breaks. It was a very small boarding school. It's a big school now. It's not a boarding school anymore, but it was a small school then. We thought it was huge. It was like 200 students, 200 boarders. We thought it was like massive. It was tiny, really, when you think about it. But there was this big, or in the eyes of a 12, 13-year-old, this huge study hall. And 200 of us went in there every night. And we had these desks. And if you saw me every night, this is what you saw. You would have thought I was a great studier. But you see, we study to standards. 2 people are in the library studying in DCU. Both of them walk out the door, having done an hour's study. But they've studied to different standards. So how focused were they in the hour? How focused were you in that hour? Well, to be honest with you, I was really good for the first half an hour, but then I got a text and I kind of lost a little bit, so I'd have to say 5. I was daydreaming for most of it. I was a 2. Oh, I was super focused. I was at 9. Here's what I discovered about time. Here's the key line. It's not about the hours you put in. It's what you put into the hours. It's not about the hours you put in. It's what you put into the hours. Let me give you a few quick time tips. Number 1, never start a week. It's just a tip. You don't have to take my advice, but as somebody that used to be horrendously bad at this, I've learned achieving things, it's doing simple things to a really high level. One of them is managing time. It's crucial to develop skills in this area if we want to get to a higher level, because we all have it. We all get this resource, but we manage it to different standards. Let's assume this is your week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. This is what I do now that I used not to, certainly in boarding school, certainly in my early 20s. But when I'm back to college, a lot wiser perhaps. Here's a key line. Never start a week without seeing it first in your mind. Jack Nicklaus, the golfer, greatest golfer of all time, he said, I never hit a shot without seeing it first. with time, I'd encourage you to see the week before you go into the week. Either you run the week. If you don't have a plan for this, it is no plan for you. Man, I've learned a lot from Jim Rohn, R-O-H-N. Either you run the week or the week runs you. So here's some key things about getting the most. How do we get the most out of the week? One of the ways is to decide in advance what success looks like in my week. I'm going to do lots of study. What does that mean? That's like saying I want to go to America. I'm going to study hard, Gerry. What does that mean? Well, Gerry, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rate myself at the end of the week here, and I'm going to be hitting, Gerry, you're going to see me hit 8 and beyond. Now, that's much more memorable. That's really making the most of it. But we decide in advance, and we come up with what are known as high priority goals, high HPs. I call them HPs, high priority goals. Number 2, this is what I do now. Schedule 60% what I call, I hope you're finding this interesting. I know we can't engage because it's not that kind of a thing, but I hope you're finding it interesting. I hope you're getting at least one thing. What I call HPAs. These are high payoff activities. High payoff activities. And I schedule now 60% of my week in advance. I don't schedule 100%. I'd love to engage with you on this. I'd love to be asking you why you think it's only 60%. And I'd love to think that you would say back to me, Gerry, you got to leave time for the real world. Unexpected things happen. Some things take longer than we might have expected. The challenge with Monday, if I fill it, I used to think that the thing to do was to just fill the whole day. But what happens if I fill the whole day and something unexpected happens and I lose an hour here? And then when I come back to my desk, I'll do all these things. But I'll just be stressing about this going home. Look at the thing I didn't get done. Whereas if we fill 60% and achieve 100% of the 60%, and then overachieve, go into overachievement, we're going home feeling, oh my gosh, I got so much done. Final tip on time management. I'm going to hand it back to Theo for if we have questions. You ready? So you have your list. You come up with your list before, and you come up with your list of activities, and then you do a thing called check in Wednesday. Check in Wednesday. This is where for 5 minutes on a Wednesday, you stop and you look back at what you wrote down here. You look back at your list and you analyze how you're doing. I used to do this on a Friday evening, but the challenge with Friday evening is it's too late. That time, this resource of Wednesday afternoon, Thursday, Friday, too late. That time is gone out of my life. I can never get it back. So the value of just stopping on a Wednesday for 5 minutes can have a massive impact on your week because you have all this time to react. What's the story? Attitude, I have not done what I'm going to do, but it's how I finished the week. Attitude, I'm going to take better actions, better results. Final question for you on this. I'd love it just to capture what's your number one takeaway? Your number one takeaway. And then I might hand it back to Theo for questions. So just capture your number one takeaway, whatever it might be. We've covered a lot of things in 53 or 54 minutes. And Theo, I might hand it back to you. Or your HPA, high payoff activities. That's what that stands for, high payoff activities. Read the inner evidence, any tips on how we can guard against us self-scoring our evidence and goal if we go really poorly. Just be a little bit kind to yourself, maybe reconnect emotionally. Theo, sorry for cutting in, I just saw the question there. I remember when I did go back to college and I did resit that final exam. I remember when I was in my office at night, this was in early summer of 2016. I'm resitting the exam for the second time. I was so challenged by it, you wouldn't believe. I found it so mentally hard, so academically hard. But I remember being in my office late one evening and thinking, oh my God, this is so hard. I'm really having to dig. And it was in doubt if I was going to pass. This is my second time. I didn't know if I was going to pass or not. I said, Gerry, you must never forget the effort you're putting in here. And I said, Gerry, you've got to put this value. So maybe it might, if we're struggling with it, just remind yourself, be kind to yourself, put a value in yourself, remind yourself of what it took. I went to boarding school as a 12-year-old and I really struggled. I was so challenged in the first few years of boarding school. I put that value, look, you got through it. So I just reconnect with how difficult that 12-year-old, 13-year-old boy had, but just to put that value. So maybe bring yourself back to that time if you're happy to do it. Theo, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just to maybe have a bit of a conversation about this. I think, you know, when people are reflecting on self-scoring in particular, I think that there's a tendency to view it emotionally through your own lens. I think that other people are you know, you're looking at that scoring, that's you scoring yourself. I think with college and academic scenarios, it's quite difficult to bridge personal reflection, which is a very emergent thing. You know, learning on a personal level happens over time. And one of the difficulties we have actually is, you know, and you know, Gerry talks about it there, is that there's standards out there. We can say, well, how do I measure against that standard? And, you know, and academia in particular is about saying, well, did this person achieve this learning outcome within a very small period of time? And it's not related really to how you feel about your personal growth. It's related to us judging you against a standard that we have, and it's planned. Whereas personal growth is emergent. You know, if you look at Gerry's story, it doesn't happen. It starts the next day, but it doesn't happen. It happens over a period of years. And particularly if I look back at, say, Gerry 6 years ago in the Helix, and he was nervous about speaking in the Helix, and you get to today, it's very, very different. And so self-scoring and self-delusion, some of that is about the emotional lens that you're in at the point in time that you're looking at something. And that's why the Wednesday tip that Gerry's giving is important, because you're taking time out and saying, well, hold a second, you know, on Monday, this is how I felt. How am I feeling today? Do I need to set my expectations for the rest of the week? And what is success? I'm going to tell a story with I don't know, Pierangelo mightn't like this story, but he might like the story. But when Pierangelo and many postdocs arrive with me and to work with me, they've got their doctorate, but they have very little publications, and they're looking at their career and saying, how am I going to compete with these other people to get promoted? And I said, well, okay, well, how many publications do you think you get this year? And Pierangelo said 1 or 2. I said, that'd be good, because I have none, or I have very few. And I tell them the story. I had set up and sold software companies. I'd failed at some. So when I had succeeded at some, so I made money, lost money, you know, in my 20s. And I remember doing my first and only interview for a job was with DCU, and I had a non-compete, so I couldn't work because I'd sold my business. And they said, well, how many publications do you think you could do in a year? And I said, 8. And I said, but you have none. And I said, yeah. And I said, no, 8's ridiculous. And I'm not going to say which professors. I said, 8's ridiculous target. And I said, oh, okay, fair enough. Now I'm coming from the private sector and I've set up companies. I'm thinking, Jesus, 8 publications is very difficult. By 2011, 4 years later, I was struggling to get 1 or 2. And I was really struggling in academia. I just couldn't really get the mindset together. And someone said to me, why don't you just do what you want to do and, you know, satisfy with what you're doing. So anyways, by the time Pierangelo arrives, I said to him, what do you think is a fair target? And he goes 3. And I said, God, I think the target should be 8. I said, that's impossible. 8's nuts. And I said, well, try. Anyways, he gets to the end of the year. He gets 4. And he goes, I told you I wouldn't get 8. I said, yeah, but you got 4 times more than what you thought you'd get. And to put it into context, I think, you know, Pierangelo's been working with me for 5 years. I think last year he got 17 or 18. So the point is you set your own targets, and really when you feel there's a slightly different thing. One is self-delusion. That, you know, there's things that you just can't achieve. Just the factors are not there. The facilitating conditions will not be there to achieve them. But you have to stretch yourself. And I do think that when you get upset and you look at emotions saying, oh, I'm not achieving what I want to achieve, you need to be very careful to separate two things. One is reality about what you can achieve and what you are achieving. And then the second thing is pride. And pride is very closely linked to comparing yourself with others. And, you know, Gerry has mentioned this, you know, you can see these people in the library and they're working 40 hours. That doesn't mean that they're working productively or that they're good or that they're thinking about something the right way or anything like that. It just means that they are in a physical place for 40 hours. That's all that's the only information you have. What's actually happening is your brain is filling in the rest of those gaps. There's an absence of information and you're just filling it in. And the reason I asked Gerry to talk, because there's a persistence, and I really like the word grit. They talk about this a lot more in America in education. And I actually, when I think about Irish people in particular, and there's no disrespect to our international students, but my experience with Irish people and Irish entrepreneurs all over the world, and even my own family and parents here, we came from the West Coast of Ireland, farming background, is grit. That people persisted through very difficult times and they get better through those things. And I think that's very, very important. And that's one of the reasons I love having Gerry talk, because a lot of his story and outlook is about persisting and overcoming and reorienting to get to the next level all the time. I used to be very, and I'd be interested in Gerry's thoughts on this. I used to be very skeptical of things like mindfulness. Do you know what I mean? And as I've got older, I'm still slightly skeptical to the idea of me doing yoga or something like that. But what I've come to realize is mindfulness can be just reading something that's octagonal, that has nothing to do with the topic that you're meant to be thinking about, and just thinking about something else for a sustained period of time, for some point in time during the day, whether it's before you go to bed, first thing you get in the morning, because you need something to move you out of a mental model so that you can revisit. Be interesting, Gerry, what your thoughts are around mindfulness. You hear it a lot now. Mindfulness is the new critical thinking. Do you know what I mean? We hear this all the time.
It's a great question. I think I'll give you a very short, quick answer to that. I think mindfulness, different things for different people. It could be 10,000. We could have 10,000 different examples of what mindfulness is. Let me share with you what one of the things that mindfulness is. And maybe it's the word that some people I'm not sure, but it depends on what we define mindfulness as. But here's one of the things that I define as mindfulness. And I'm doing a really big event this evening and tomorrow with a really big audience. And I'm going to be sharing what I believe to be the 4 keys to a great life, and lots more besides, or different things. But the number one piece of information I have in my head actually falls under the umbrella of mindfulness, I believe. And I never really thought about it as mindfulness until the last 2 minutes when you said it, Theo. But I believe this for me is mindfulness. It's every day, and it's the first key to a great life. For me is conscious awareness that I'm alive. And what I mean by that is I now try every day for 30 seconds. See, from the age of 17 to 27, I look back, I have no great consciousness of that time, no real memories of that time. Like it just went in the blink of an eye, and no great happiness or challenge or ambition in my life. But now every day I stop for 30 seconds, or it's my intention to stop for 30 seconds. I usually do it early in the morning. And I just step out of unconsciousness and I step into consciousness of, oh my God, this is a day of your life. And you only have so number of these days. What I find, what's the value of that for me? It gives me incredible awareness of what I have. Like that's wealth, time and health. That's ultimate wealth for me. Like, how many rich people do we know that are not happy? So yes, money can make some people happy, give us a certain level of happiness. But what's true wealth, I believe, is the ability for me to be able to speak like this. What an incredible gift. But for me, mindfulness, number one example of it is every day I consciously tell myself, this is a day of your life. Are you making the most of this? What are you grateful for that you have in your life today?
Yeah, it's funny. I was sharing something on LinkedIn. I'm not usually one for sharing kind of things, but we were going into the second week of lockdown, and someone was saying to me, "Oh, I'm so fed up of working from home," and I saw this great image, and it says, reasons to love working from home. Work, you have a home. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Everything else is a bonus. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
And for college students, I also think that's interesting. It's like, yeah, it's difficult. You're not getting the full university experience right now. Um, but the reasons to love studying from home. You have a home. You're in college. You've got the time, and someone's spending time for you to learn something. You have that opportunity. You have to remember that's a very rare thing. It's a very rare thing, and appreciating those things I think is important. But equally, making the most out of the time that you have right now, and thinking about, even though COVID-19 is a very difficult situation, and there's no getting around that. But in one sense, we are all fortunate that we're living through it, and living through it is a very important thing. And then the second thing is, it's a historic moment, and that we will survive this, and that we're all going to develop and grow from it. Um, and again, I go back to your point there about, you know, um, what's your story going to be when we get out of this? Do you know what I mean? What did you achieve when COVID happened? I was telling someone the other day, myself, my wife, we sold our house, we bought a new house, we'll have redeveloped our house. Our kids will have gone to secondary school all during COVID-19. So if someone said to me, "What was COVID-19 like?" I said, well, I don't know what that was like, but this is what our family experienced. This is what we achieved over that period of time. And I do think that you need to reflect on what you achieve as opposed to what you didn't achieve. Because there'll be plenty of people who tell you what you didn't achieve, like the college ringing Gerry and saying, "Oh, I have bad news for you, you failed." In one sense, they're ringing you and saying, I have good news, you have another opportunity to succeed. Do you know what I mean? And I thought, there's a great book by Randy Pausch called The Last Lecture. And he talks about walls. And he said, a coach that he had in American football said, the walls are there to for you to show that you can break through them. That they're not there to keep you out. They're there to show that you deserve to break through. And so, when people think, "Oh, I failed something," or something like that, as long as the repeat process is there, for instance, for you to demonstrate you can do better, it gives you, unlike Donald Trump today, because there's no mulligan on insurrection, but put into golf terms, the repeat process in universities is a mulligan. And it's very just, in life, you don't necessarily get a chance to redo these things over and over again. But, it just means that you didn't meet a particular objective standard on a given day often. But the fact is, by getting into a course or into a university program, you've already reached a point where someone says you're capable of completing this course. After that is, are you organized and in the right place for you to achieve your potential? And so at the time that Gerry probably failed his course, they were just saying, well, maybe your approach just wasn't right. And you need to just reposition yourself now differently to succeed. And I think a lot of that is about your mental attitude towards yourself and your learning. And particularly postgrad education is very different than undergrad education. And I would say adult or mature education, if you're coming back to education like Gerry did, it's very, very difficult because you're out of that habit and you're immersed in a situation where you have to learn new standards. And that's why we really want people to look at their mental thinking as they approach this new semester, particularly in lockdown, about how they organize themselves for their own mental physical and academic fitness. Just there's a question here, Gerry. What would you say inspired your paradigm shift? Was there a spiritual influence or a change in your belief system?
I see that question there, and there's another question. I'm going to try and combine two answers. Somebody said around, let me just see the other question. So any tips for motivation in terms of physical exercise, especially for individuals who used to be very active, but now can't get back into it? So let me try and answer those two questions in one, if I may. So I took up running. I immediately felt better. And what I used to do and still do, thankfully to this day, is I exercise very early in the morning, and I began to see this whole world like visually. Like I used to run at the time at 6 o'clock in the morning. I go a little bit earlier now, but it was kind of a 6 o'clock. And I ran in a canal in my hometown. I see there's a fellow Mullingar man here. Owen, thanks for your message, Owen. We went to the same school, I see in the chat box there. But so I just began to, some might call it spiritual. For me, I remember when I was studying the talk, there was a Hungarian man who spoke about flow. I'm sure you've come across that, Theo, about flow. And it's almost like, the greatest runs I have are the ones I don't even remember when I go home. God, where did I go? I don't remember being out 4 miles out there and turning, because I was in such flow. And that's maybe another form of spirituality. And that's what I got early in the mornings instantly. So maybe that motivated me to go to the next level. With that, how do you go from a few kilometers to 32 marathons in 32 days? Or how do you go from not doing physical exercise at all to maybe getting up to 3 or 4 times a week? If this is a swimming pool, I use the metaphor as a swimming pool. Start in the shallow end. Start here. Just do it once. And maybe if you're really struggling, go for a 10-minute walk, but do it every week once, and prove that you can do it for 3 or 4 weeks. Then maybe either stretch it to 15 minutes once, or maybe do it 2 by 10 minutes. That's just putting your toe in the water, getting a little bit wet. And that maybe do more if you want to, but this defines success. I walked once this week for 10 minutes. And by getting our toe in the water, we feel like we're involved in the process, and it may give us a tiny bit more confidence. And then the idea is then just to move then to the next stage. That's how you end up running 32 marathons in 32 days. It's no different.
I think everybody, when you're thinking about these things, we sometimes it's called the Pomodoro technique, where you break things down into small intervals and you chunk them down into small goals that you want to achieve, and you build those up over time. And it works for writing, it works for presentations, it works for any kind of sports, etc. Just, don't focus on writing 10,000 words, focus on writing a paragraph or even a sentence, and then building up from there. Because just, when you think about it, when you think of massive achievements, they can all be broken down into little steps. You know what I mean? And I imagine when you get to the marathons, Gerry, there's a point where you got to, I only have to do X amount more steps or meters, or another 3 minutes now, I'm going to get to the next checkpoint, and I know that I break through that barrier, you're going, because it's that breaking those things down, how your brain deals with things.
And on that, the exercise we did earlier on about the why and the consequences, what I would encourage people to do there is keep that information in front of you. Somebody asked there, did you struggle with any of the marathons? On the days that we difficult days mentally or physically, we used to remind ourselves of why we were doing this in the first place. You see, the why is the intrinsic motivator. And even when I went back to college, the reason I went back to college was, for me, the why was I'd unfinished business. I said, Gerry, you should have done this qualification 25 years ago. And it had been eating me for 25 years. I said, that's why I'm going back to college. Plus, I wanted to add value to my clients as well in my business. But my number one reason was I knew I had this in me to get this qualification, and I knew I should have done it in my 20s, and I didn't. So that was one of my really big whys. So on days when I struggle with those exams, or struggled with those. By the way, thankfully I did graduate I did get it the second time, but I used to remind myself of why I signed up for this in the first place. On your point about the Pomodoro, I've written down here 1/1200. There's a guy called John Neighbor. People might be really interested in. John Neighbor was a swimmer, 18 years of age, really good swimmer, identified he wanted to win a gold medal 4 years later, but he had to get 4 seconds faster over 100 meters backstroke. He broke it down. He did a really quick equation on a maths equation. He broke down 4 seconds of improvement into the number of hours that he would swim every day for 4 years. And he figured he'd swim 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, 10 months of the year for the next 4 years. And he did a simple calculation. If I can get the average of 1/1200 of a second faster over 100 meters every hour I train, I will be able to swim 4 seconds faster than I can now. And so what he did was 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, 10 months a year for the next 4 years. This became his focus. Today in the pool, I want to get faster by 1/1200 of a second. And he did that consistently over time. I'm sure there was days he fell backwards, but consistently he did that. And if you Google the history of it, John Neighbor 4 years later got into the swimming pool in the Montreal Olympics, and he won a gold medal with this principle.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to say, it's a guilty pleasure film, but if you ever, because obviously someone brought up spirituality there, if you ever watch The Legend of Bagger Vance, I'm not even a golf fan, but there's a part where there's a kid, and at the end of 3 rounds of golf, or 2 rounds of golf, one of the characters is so far off the lead, everyone's gone, oh, he's gone, he can't win. And then this kid goes, well, if he picks up a hole every 4 holes, he can still win, And that's the thing, is that, people talk about the quantified self, Gerry, a lot. They talk about, obviously they focus on how many Facebook likes I get, or they focus on all these types of things, which are kind of ephemeral. But when you think about anything, including study or your life or whatever it is, you can also quantify those things down to things that you need to achieve. They're just a bit more soft in nature. And, study and academia is exactly the same, but so is the workplace. If you want to get promoted, I'm sure that when you're talking to Facebook or Coca-Cola, etc., they might be talking about teams or stretch targets. And I think a great example over the last year has been, whatever you want to call it, Project Warp Drive or whatever it is, Warp Speed, this thing to get a vaccine for COVID-19. Now you look back now and say, well, actually the work started 4 years ago looking at other coronaviruses and stuff, but the fact that people could mobilize so quickly, and history is full of examples of these massive mobilizations. So you can apply these kind of very small things down to, well, what are all the things that we need to break down? I think Apollo 13 is a great film to watch, where you think about how they break down every single component to get these guys back to Earth when their rocket fails, and so all these challenges are about breaking down, well, if we can get these things done, it leads to something else. And it's really important to understand the causality between your actions and the outcomes, reflecting on that, and that becomes the input to the next thing. So this kind of cycle of reflection, I think, is really important, even if it's unconscious. You don't necessarily have to think about it. Sometimes you don't think about these in this. Obviously, in this particular example that Gerry's given, the guy's thought it down to in that kind of, but he was way ahead of his time. You look now in modern sports, it is all about analysis and deliberate practice, monitoring and iteration. And I think that, for students today or people working, it's just a question of what do we need to achieve today and how that input into my next goal. And the thing is to break those goals down to very achievable, but they must be stretch goals. Personal growth comes from engaging with things that are uncomfortable or disorienting or unexpected. They don't come from things that you're good at or from the comfort zone. They come from pushing you constantly out of that comfort zone. I'm going to leave Gerry go because I have a feeling between myself and Gerry we could go for another. And I know that he's given us a lot of time, and he has an event tonight. Obviously, much more difficult to do a big show your appreciation with a clap. But on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank Gerry for giving us his time. A lot of great insights, and hopefully we'll have Gerry back again. So thanks very much. I hope you all have a very good semester moving forward. I know for myself, Molly Pierangelo and Gerry, who organised today's activity, we hope you have every success in the next semester and in your academic studies and your work. All right, thanks very much. Thank you very much, Gerry. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.